Start your engines.
Well, good evening, gentlemen. And on behalf of the Village of Cary and the Board of Zoning, Planning, and Appeals, I'm going to hereby call this meeting to order. We have a quorum of members, and at this time, I'd like to ask our Director of Community Development, Mr. Brian Simmons, to please call the roll.
Kretschmer?
Here.
Pippin?
Here.
Graziano?
Present.
O'Laughlin? Williams? Jasper? Corey?
Here. Thank you very much. Gentlemen, we invite you to rise with us for the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So thank you very much, everyone. So, gentlemen, as I was mentioning before the meeting began, we have a quorum, but we don't have a full complement of members. Your application does require 4 positive votes. I have no idea how this will play out tonight, but I just want to make sure that you're comfortable with the group of men that are assembled here is okay for you to review your application. Yeah? Okay.
Yep.
All right, so I've got just a housekeeping issue that I need to attend to, and then we're going to come back to your continued application. So, gentlemen, in your packet, you would have received the approval of the minutes. There was 8 of them. You'll recall the past pattern and practice now for each case, you get your individual minutes. So I don't know if anybody has any questions around those minutes, because I'll just seek general consent in a moment around the meeting minutes. The other ones that you have in front of you is just a reference document from the last meeting. Those will not be considered for approval tonight. So hearing none, on
Case 002, on page 2, the pin on the 4th line is
I was waiting for that, Mr. Graziano. You know what I was worried about? You're going to be absolutely correct. All right.
I
Thank
haven't
you.
found anything in a long time, so I figured,
Well, Sue is here, kind of jotting down the notes, so thank you. Okay, gentlemen, on a voice vote, the chair will seek general consent of the approval of minutes from April 11th. There are 8 meeting minutes, all related to the UDO. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you very much, gentlemen. And one other housekeeping issue, I just wanted all of you to know that I attended a meeting this past Tuesday. And good evening, Mr. Jasper. I was just saying to the gentleman that this past Tuesday, I attended a meeting and the UDO gentleman was formally approved unanimously. And I just want to go on the record again to say thank you very much for your hard work and dedication. You'll recall the guiding principles that we put forward in this document was around making it easier to understand, simpler, creating best practices, not only here but from around the country, creating a framework for economic development, and ultimately as a community being easier to do business with. And I think the fact that it was passed unanimously, without any objection, without any changes, speaks volumes to the hard work you put into this. So I want you to know how much I appreciate that, because that's going to have your fingerprints on it for a long time to come. So very, very well done. Something to be very proud of. So nice job. All right, so gentlemen, now we're going to have a continuation of a case. This is going to be case number ZPA 03001. You recall that this was continued from April the 25th. And at this time, I'm going to turn it back over to Mr. Simmons for a brief overview.
Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As mentioned, this request is for the Country Commons Shopping Center. As the board may recall, the petitioner is seeking approval to convert the entire structure over time to residential units and to convert the existing commercial that's on the first floor of that building into residential apartments. As part of that, they require conditional use approval for multifamily dwelling and then variations for both density and parking. The brief summary of the slide, the previous request is highlighted in this slide here. They were seeking approval for a total of 18 units, which would receive a density variation of 16 units per acre, and also parking variation to reduce the required parking down to 31 spaces. The petition was continued to allow the petitioner additional time to revise their plan to try to address comments that were made at the public hearing back in April. Based off the feedback, the petitioner has proposed a few modifications to their plan. Specifically, they're proposing to eliminate one of the future residential units on the first floor So the total number of units in the building would decrease from 18 down to 17. That would have a modification to the proposed density of the project, again dropping the number of units per acre down by 1 unit. And they're also proposing some modifications to the parking lot that would stripe additional spaces in the lot, but with the decreased number of units, that would also decrease their parking requirements for the property. So the variation that was originally requested was for a total of 9 spaces, and now they would be decreasing that down to 2 spaces. Again, brief history for the site. It was originally constructed back in the 1920s. It's had various uses over time, and was rezoned to the B3R district most recently in 2007. I won't go into all the detail, but this gives a history of information was presented in the presentation back in April. Again, they're proposing to convert the commercial spaces on the first floor. 4 of the units would be converted at present time, which are highlighted in the slide. Those 4 units, the C, D, F, and G1. There were floor plans and renderings provided in the packet at the previous meeting. I also have copies of those in the presentation if those are desired to be looked at as well. Analyzing the density variation, this slide, the table has been revised to show what the density is proposed for the project. The maximum that's permitted for the zoning district under the zoning ordinance was a total of 6.25 units per acre. They are originally proposed to go up to 15.5 units per acre, but with the decrease in number of units, that would decrease their density down to 15 units an acre rounded up. Additionally, the number of units on the ground floor would be modified where previously 10 units were proposed. Those would be decreased to 9 as they're combining 2 of the spaces into one unit. So it's a larger unit as opposed to 2 smaller units was the primary change. The table in the lower right-hand corner of the slide, I apologize, does not show the proposed density, but that shows existing densities for other projects that have been recently supported in the village. So it would be within the range of projects that have received variations for density in the recent past. Again, with the parking, the property currently has 31 spaces. The petitioners proposed some slight modifications to the parking lot layout that would increase the number of spaces that are provided on site. That the spaces would comply with the minimum sizes for width and depth of the parking stalls. But they also are also counting 2 parking spaces at the end of the driveway, which is located to the east of the retaining wall area, that those serve a specific unit. In the second floor of the building, those would count towards their total as well for total parking on site. Based on the revisions with the reduced number of units and also the reconfiguration of the parking lot, the site is required to provide 38 spaces, but with the revisions we'll provide a total of 36 spaces, roughly 2.1 spaces per unit, where code would require 2.25 spaces per unit. So a variation of only 2 parking spaces is now being requested by the petitioners. This slide shows the reconfiguration of the center of the parking lot. Currently there's a through lane on the north end of the parking row that would be restriped to provide parking up to the sidewalk in front of the units. Would gain a few extra spaces in that row, and then the rest of the parking lot would also be restriped with the other improvements that were recommended by staff as conditions in the report as well. As mentioned, no other documentation was provided the previous time, so the staff was recommending a few conditions to bring the property up to compliance with current regulations for landscaping both in the parking lot and screening of the foundation of the buildings, and also the trash enclosure. And then as future phases were to occur, to provide some additional foundation landscaping and pavement for the driveway to the east of the property. This slide, again, I'll go through quickly, but shows the location of each of those improvements with the parking lot screening, with restriping, potential or modifications to the storefront to make it residential in character as opposed to the commercial glass storefront which exists today, relocating the trash receptacle to the trash enclosure on the east side of the property, repaving the gravel driveway, providing foundation landscaping, and then finally removing any commercial signage that exists along Cary Road with a full conversion of the building. As mentioned, the comprehensive plan designates the property as a commercial land use under the B3R district. Both commercial and residential are permitted. So the multifamily building would comply with the directives of the comprehensive plan and also the zoning district, which will allow for the mix of use on the property or the potential use of the property just for multifamily development. This slide summarizes the conditional use standards that are for consideration for the petition. Again, for the multifamily dwelling requires conditional use approval. And then the density and parking variations require a review of the variation standards. If the ZPA believes that the petitioners have met the burden of proof to support the variation request on the conditional use, staff would recommend that the ZPA recommend approval of the conditional use for a multifamily dwelling and a density of 15 units per acre, variation for a density of 15 units per acre, and parking to reduce it from 38 to 36 spaces for the property located at 271 Country Commons Road, subject to conditions that are in the staff report.
Thank you very much, Mr. Simmons. So, gentlemen, I know we were continuing this. Do you have new questions for Mr. Simmons? No questions. Okay. So by way of background, everyone, just as a refresher, if I'm going to ask the petitioner next to come forward to see if they have any additional comments around the petition, just kindly ask that you state your name and address for the record because it is filmed. It goes on to the village's website so people that don't attend can see this. And for those of you that are here from the public, we'll also open it up for public comments once the petitioner concludes their remarks, okay? So we'll send it over to you now. Good evening.
My name is Jay Kim. I represent 271 Country Commons. So, and I remember the last meeting that we had, some of the concerns that the people in the committee brought up. Yeah, some of the concerns, and we decided to revisit our proposal. And so we modified, like Mr. Simmons said, we modified decided to combine one of the two units together into one to reduce that space. And also we kind of looked at the opportunity and what can we do without really doing a major rehab. So what we decided to do was I saw that the drive-through lane over there, and I went there and measured it out, and it's actually 13 feet. So 13 feet wide. So what that does is that I know the parking requirements is 9 by 18. Mm-hmm. So it pushed everything, and if we were to restripe everything, I would gain an additional 1 space on the end. Mm-hmm. So that's where that 3 spaces came up. And also, one of the things that wasn't addressed, because we were talking about the shortages, was that over on Unit 8, which is the far east side, mm-hmm. has their own driveway, and they do use it. I mean, it just goes right up to their unit. It's for convenience, and they just, they have 2 cars that they regularly park on that side. So I think that those 2 spaces, I know that it's easily, if you kind of park the car straight across, I mean, it's comfortably can house 4 vehicles, but for this purpose, just 2 vehicles, I would like to add into the parking space as well. So, and all the concerns that came up with the 2.25 spaces per unit. So I was really curious, really, what is the real use? So just recently, I installed some cameras up mm-hmm. at Country Commons for security purposes. And then what I did was, I don't know if the board wants to see this, but I got some copies of, do you want to see them?
Sure.
Okay, so. I don't know if I made enough.
Thank you,
copies.
Mr. Kim.
We can share one here, Mr. Kim, if that works. Yeah.
I know it's kind of small. I got a couple of copies of the bigger ones.
Thank you, sir.
So what you're seeing up here is about 6 days straight. So what I did was I go, well, on the residential side, there could be people that work nights and stuff. So what I did was I took 2 snapshots. I took one of like 8 p.m. and one at around 5 p.m. So the cameras, the times are a little bit off. The reason being is that it only captures when there's movement, and that's why they're a little bit off. But yeah, one's starting from 2017 all the way to like today. So like at the very bottom one, you see it's 22nd and 23rd. The reason being that camera ran out of.
Can I just ask a question, Mr. Kim? You said 8 p.m. and 5 p.m. Did you mean 8 a.m.?
Oh yeah, 5 a.m.
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a time stamp on there, and time and date stamp on there.
Thank you for the clarification.
So I looked at it, and overall, it ranged somewhere between 7 and at the most, I think the one in the bottom left had the 11 cars there. So when you're looking at overall, I said, okay, it's not too bad. It came out to like 1.3 cars per unit as the residential goes. And then I looked at it closely, and I realized there's 3 vehicles in this picture that is not moving, has not moved one bit. It's the one that's this SUV right here.
Right.
And then there's this car in the center, and you could tell because it's parked like off, and it hasn't moved one bit. And then there's this car all the way in the back over there by the dumpster, and you see that those cars are just sitting. I got to investigate, but maybe they're not working and abandoned. But so if you do count that out, it's just really today parking. I don't think is going to be an issue. But like I said, we will make the variations to try to get closer to code.
Thank you. Did you want to comment further, Mr. Kim?
No.
Okay, before you adjourn, I just want to ask the gentleman if they have any questions of yourself.
You have you have the space to meet the zoning requirements as regards parking. Why not just do it? I mean, you're 2 vehicles short. You've got that long driveway there with some moderate changes to the driveway. You could meet your parking requirements. Why ask for a zoning variance when you fully capable without cutting down trees and expending a lot of dollars? Why aren't you just meeting the zoning requirements?
So you're talking about the driveway, the long driveway? Okay. So if, I don't know if there's a good picture of it, it's got to be more horizontal. What happens is the grade, where that drive, if you take a look at, let me show you the closer up, that would be a better representation maybe.
Of this image, Jay? Sure.
So here,
Mr. Kim, the photo that's up on the screen, does that help you at all?
yeah, it's kind of hard because it's
Yeah.
aerial. We've got a couple of
Sure.
So what ends up happening, you see that grade that goes up?
Right?
And that where the tree line is actually starts going up as well, like this. So there's,
It's away from the drive.
yeah, so
To the
it inclines. So there's actually kind of a wall
Right here?
that's formed as it gets closer to the unit. So it's kind of steep.
Up in this.
So there's only way to extend that out. I would have to excavate to get and remove some trees to get that happen.
Okay. Where were you going to put your 2 additional parking spaces within that drive?
It's like a retaining wall.
Right up there, there's enough room to where you can just cut some excavation out to meet the 9 foot by 18 right there. So you could park the car side by side. Granted,
How
it's,
far off the road is that?
up the Country Commons
Street.
Road.
Yeah.
It's
Roughly 90 feet.
yeah.
We're talking right here.
So
right?
you're talking about doing it all the way up towards the unit, the
Yeah, just kind of widening it out a little so you can go side by side. There's that picture right there. I mean, it's kind of
Right,
hard to
you're
see.
you're putting 2 units up there,
No,
2 parking spaces.
2 parking spaces.
2 parking
yeah,
spaces up
yeah.
there. You said you were going to add, I thought I heard you said you were going to add 2 more parking spaces along that drive.
No. I just said that just,
Good.
All right, so Patrick, the 2 spaces we're talking about are right here.
Right.
They're already there. Then the 2 additional spaces, right now, this is a turnabout. They're going in right here, so you're no longer going to be able to drive
Right.
through. Did that answer your question?
Okay.
this is better because it has colors.
Yeah.
And doesn't get
And Commissioner Jasper, just the conversation I had with the petitioner, they had discussed with that driveway, potentially utilizing more than 2 vehicles can park on that driveway. But from a code aspect, if that driveway only served the 1 unit, I recommended that they would stripe the end of it to have those 2 spaces that would serve that unit. We can count those 2 spaces towards the code. I wasn't comfortable with recommending that most of the parking be provided along that driveway.
So within the lot, there's 36 spaces.
Within the lot, there's 34 spaces, and then there's the 2 additional spaces are at the end of that driveway. So, but total, that'll
Okay.
be 36 spaces.
Okay.
But those 2 spaces would essentially meet the code requirement for that 1 unit that has that primary access. And then the rest of the lot would have 34 spaces to serve the remaining 16 units.
Okay.
Anything else, Mr. Jasper?
I thought we had also had conversations around the design of the units and their functionality. Was it, does anybody remember that, or is that, am I thinking of other things?
Well, what was provided in the previous petition, it was included the floor plans for the units.
Mm-hmm.
So those you should have had in the previous packet. So there were a
Right.
few floor plans that were for the 4 units that were to be converted as of the current petition. This would include a 2-bedroom unit. There were a few 1-bedroom units that were proposed in this slide here as well that kept the existing and the district.
Right, but
provided
I was
some
talking
information.
more about the layout within the boundaries of the building itself. Not the layout of the individual units, but the,
Where they're situated in, or?
yeah.
Yeah, from a petitioner potentially provide some additional information, but as far as where they are located presently or where the units currently are vacant. So the 4 that are highlighted in green were the locations that they're proposing as part of this petition to convert those to residential, and then basically the ends of the building would remain as commercial.
You have a good recollection, Mr. Jasper. I think I asked that question.
Okay. So I'm not crazy.
I do have a question about the layout of the building there. So when the commercial units, when the leases are up, are you planning to let them run out their lease and then turn those into residential as well?
So I would honor renewing their leases if they want to stay. I mean, there's some established businesses there, and I don't want to force them out. It's just that the original proposal was because the way where the building is and how it's situated, it's kind of Cary Algonquin Road. It's kind of blocked off. You really can't tell that there's a mall inside. So, and for years, we've been trying to get tenants in here, commercial tenants, but it's very hard to. So we said, well, if we can't get anybody in there, is it possible that maybe we can turn this into a residential if opportunity arises? Yeah.
So if those stay commercial, would that affect the minimum parking requirements? Would we need more spaces because they're commercial?
Well, you'd have to request again.
So then what do we do? If we stay residential and commercial, then our variance is much greater, isn't it?
Yeah, so the variance that was requested or as proposed, if I can find the slide here, where the change of use, if it's increasing parking requirements, the code would only require you to provide the additional spaces that are required for that change. So if we changed it from residential or vice versa, from a commercial to a residential unit, if the change requires additional parking for that modification, then they would need to provide the parking for the difference between the two. In this instance, with the existing conditions of the property, the number of residential units that they have, with the 8 units now and the roughly 8,000 square feet of office area, the property currently is required to have 44 parking spaces. So under the proposed condition of the 12 units and the 4,000 square feet, their parking requirement is actually decreasing. So they're not required under our code to provide additional parking. So they still would be non-conforming from a standpoint that there be more parking. The site would be required to have more parking, but the variance request that's presented is for the full build out for the full residential use of the building.
So we're voting on the full build out. That's what.
Correct. So the requests were to try and simplify the request because you're going to have multiple phases to get to that point. The simplest way to present it was to present the final situation as far as the building being fully in residential and then any relief is required for that development at that point. So the property currently is non-conforming from a few areas. Parking's one of them that through this slow transition to full residential would bring it closer to compliance. And then with the revision that they're proposing tonight with one less unit, it would be that much closer to complying with code if it fully is converted to the 17 units.
Okay. Any other questions, gentlemen? Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I have two. First one is, do you have an anticipated time frame or a range to get to full build out? When do you anticipate getting the full build out?
So that's a tough one to answer because, like I said, we have one commercial tenant in there. It's been there since 1998.
Okay.
It's an established business, and and I don't want to kick them out. If they want to stay there, I'm okay with it. So I guess whatever the board thinks is reasonable for maybe a time period that if, like I said, if a commercial unit does move out, and then I'll try to rent it out. I mean, it's more cost effective for me to just get somebody else in there. But if we just can't get a commercial unit in there, my ask is that can we convert that to residential? That's the ask.
My second question is in regards to the current wooded area to the east and north of the property. Are you planning to do any changes to that area?
Not at the moment. I did talk to a couple of our neighbors in Drop Valley, and it seems like from their input that they do want some coverage there between Country Commons and their backyard.
Okay, so it's your intent to maintain that coverage?
Yes, and I don't want to change the look of the building as well. I think it has a lot of historical aspect to it, so I want to keep the outside looking as same as possible.
Okay, thank you. Turn over to Pat.
Just remind me the studio, one bedroom, two bedroom, three bedroom makeup of the current units?
The current
The current,
residential,
yeah.
there is 3 lofts that are 2 bedrooms. There is 2 one-bedrooms, and the others are 2 bedrooms. Yeah. So I would like to have so the 4 empty units that I was proposing now, it was 2 of them was going to be a 1-bedroom, and 2 of them was going to be a 2-bedroom.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else, gentlemen, before I open up to the public? All right, Mr. Kim, do you have anything else that you wanted to offer before we open up to the public?
I think I'm good.
Yeah, Mr. Lawson, anything from yourself? No. Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is the time we will open it up to the public, and as you probably heard me say before, we try to be open-minded about this. This is not necessarily designed to be kind of a give and take between this board and yourself, or between yourself and the petitioner, but we try to get to the right spot, so we'll be as open-minded as possible. But those are kind of the guidelines. And the other item just to remember is that when you speak, state your name and address for the record, because it does get rebroadcast on a future date. Okay? So, please.
Hello, George Chinkus, 277 Little Stonegate Court, Cary. As I spoke at the last meeting as well, concern for the Trout Valley area, Trout Valley residents, et cetera, and Cary residents who live in that area. It's about the density and the proximity. With the lot density, even with the reduction down to, I think you're saying now it's going to be just over 15 units per acre. It's the second or third highest density in Cary, only behind the 2 senior living facilities. And with that high density and the, for lack of a better term, unusability of the recreation space on that property around it, because as they even stated, the area, the wooded area on the east side where they can't even put parking because it's so hilly and unusable, that's the only recreation space that they're going to have on that parcel. And as they just said, it's unusable even for a parking space. So part of the density on a lot, in my understanding, is to provide recreation space. Because I remember dealing with the PEDCOR development and everything else, talk about green space and usability for the tenants. There's no talk about that being going on here. Where are these 18 units of tenants going to recreate? There is no space for that. Okay. Also, the concern about parking is tantamount because, again, there is no overflow space. Unlike PEDCOR, where you have other city side streets that have street side parking available, there is no street side parking available in that area because of the Country Commons is a 2-lane road. There's no shoulders in Trout Valley area for parking. There's no parking available on Cary Algonquin Road. So, they're talking about they don't see a lot of parking lot usage. Well, when they get to 18 units and they're not going to have enough parking to meet that, what happens if somebody's having a party? There is no overflow parking. Where are these people going to park? Also, I dispute the count of 36 parking spots. I've counted it currently. They've got 31. If they're adding 2 by getting rid of the drive-through loop, and they're counting 2 at the unit A, that's 31 plus 2 plus 2. That's 35, unless I've failed math. I've walked in that parking lot and I've counted 35 spots, or 31 spots, plus the 2 and the additional 2. That's 35. So that's not 36. So those are my concerns, and do you have any questions for my thoughts?
Well, we're not necessarily
Okay.
cross-examining
Okay,
the
I just
public.
wondered if there was any
Yeah.
comment back. So.
But thank you for your comments. We appreciate it. Good evening.
Good evening, David Hall, 124 Turkey Hill in Trout Valley. I was at the last meeting. I was kind of concerned that it's common knowledge about the dumpster, and my understanding dumpsters have to be enclosed. So that's kind of been accepted by Cary, that the unenclosed dumpster's been there. The other aspect that I wanted to bring up was the owners of this building need to be good neighbours to Trout Valley. A few years ago, there was an abandoned vehicle on that lot for many months. The tires went flat, and we approached them about moving it, and nothing was done. It finally did go. Now it sounds as though we got other abandoned vehicles on the property by the testimony tonight. So all I'm addressing is that if you give this variance on the parking, that you ensure that the parking changes are implemented before they convert these other business units to residential.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else here from the public who would like to speak? Okay, thank you. We're going to close the public portion at this time. Gentlemen, before I call the motion, I do have a question for Mr. Pippin. Were you suggesting in your comments that you were looking to potentially sunset the commercial use of the building, or not necessarily?
No, I was not necessarily looking to sunset that. I was just kind of curious as to at what point are we going to get to this full build out, and where all of these conditions that we're looking at tonight would truly be in effect.
Okay.
I would defer to the property owners as far as how they want to, put their building together. So.
And I just need to double check with Mr. Simmons with regard to Mr. Hinkis's comments around parking. I just want to double check that we're saying 36, at least publicly. And I just want to double check where we are on that.
Correct. It's based on the plan that's provided that was part of the packet this evening. I just recounted those that are on the exhibit. It does have 34 parking spaces within the lot, and with the 2 spaces at the end of the driveway would bring the total up to 36. Yep. So based off the exhibit provided by the petitioner, is showing 36 spaces.
Thank you very much. So gentlemen, before I call the motion, were there other questions that you had?
I do have one more.
Sure.
For parking for you. Do you assign parking spaces to the residential units? That way so you kind of know what cars are there and what, just to help avoid, abandoned cars being left in the parking lot?
All right. Right now, there is no assigned spaces, but that's something that we can consider.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kim. Is that something you want in the motion?
I think I would like that, yeah.
Okay.
Because, especially when you're talking this area, people can just come park wherever. If you have your assigned spots, kind of helps control a little bit better.
So how would you envision that be occurring? They'd be numbered, or?
Yeah, maybe per units, like unit 101A, 101B, if you have two spaces per unit.
Right. Right now, it's kind of hard to do because there is commercial there, so we need that space to be open for any commercial overflow. But yeah, I mean, if it is full residential, we can, definitely assign parking spots.
Okay.
Can you assign parking spots currently to the residential and leave the rest open for the commercial uses? So in other words, you have, I can't recall exactly how many units you have now that are residential, but it's 8, 8. So, designate spots for those 8 and then leave the rest for commercial. And as those commercial ones turn over to residential, assign those spots to those particular units.
That's a possibility, yes.
Okay.
All right, so gentlemen, if we incorporate that last comment into the motion, is that going to be acceptable to you or not so much? Mr. Grass?
I don't see the necessity, especially as long as you still got commercial there. Are we saying that these 2 spaces are residential only and the commercial can't use them during the day?
I agree with Jim. I think that the layout of the parking lot isn't necessarily such that allows for, usually when you're assigning spots on a residential basis, you're trying to make it convenient for the renters.
Right.
And, this way that, this is set up, there's going to be some people that are out close to the road.
Yeah, if I'm in one of the third floor lofts and my parking space is over there by the trash receptacle, I'm not gonna be real happy.
Going to be looking for a discount.
Besides, those stairways are narrow going up and down. It's hard to carry groceries.
So, Mr. Kretschmer, Mr. Pippin, is this going to be acceptable to you to withdraw, or do you want that back in, or how do you want to proceed with this?
I'll defer to Mr. Kretschmer. Because it seemed.
I
One
would
to
like
the left
the
side of the podium, sir.
Yes, that's right. I mean, I would like it in there for if it's full build out,
Full build out, meaning residential?
full residential build out.
Okay.
Because we had, with the concern for the parking and like we're saying, there's cars that are sitting here not even moving, and maybe that helps control that a little bit. I mean, I've seen a lot of, apartment buildings and things with the assigned parking spaces that way. You have your assigned parking space and there's a visitor's parking space, things like that. So at least you're always guaranteed to have a space, because if another neighbor is having a get together, everyone starts parking, they start taking up your space. Residents that live there can't find a spot. So if you have an assigned spot.
Yeah, if it is a full build out, I think that'll be a lot easier to do, because to assign the parking space closer to their units, I think would be doable, yes.
For full build, okay, I'd be good for a full build out.
So, Mr. Kretschmer, if I call the motion and then say that when this establishment becomes fully residential, there would be assigned parking spaces, is that going to be acceptable?
Yeah.
Just want to make sure it's going to be, well, we'll call the motion, we'll see what happens, but I think that we want to keep it in and around.
Acceptable, but
Yeah.
it's unnecessary.
Mr. Graziano, do you have a point of view on this before I call?
No, just commentary regarding the number of parking spaces. One, we require 44 now, we've only got 31. I've never seen a car parked on Country Commons Road. And obviously, we all know that commercial requires high turnover, and that's why we require more parking spaces and that. So I have no problem with the 36 parking spaces the way we're.
Maybe I can ask the question a different way, Mr. Kretschmer. Mr. Simmons, in our community, are there any locations that have assigned parking? And if we do, how is it enforced?
If there is any locations that do have assigned parking, it would be at a local level from a property owner standpoint. It's not something the village would generally get involved in from private property enforcement. Most of, I would say probably some of the older complexes in the village may have assigned spaces per unit. I can't specifically say if there's an example of a property in town, but generally the way our code is required is it establishes the minimum required spaces for the use that are intended to be utilized by all the users of the facility, whether they be residents or businesses or customers of businesses, and that those parking spaces are made available to all. But if there's a need to assign spaces, that's something that would be done at the individual property level to manage the parking on a site.
Okay. So, gentlemen, here's what I'll do. I'll call the motion with it in it, and if you want to modify the motion, then you're well within your right to do so, okay? Does that sound acceptable to everybody?
I have a proposal.
Yes?
When we consider assigning spaces, can we assign either one assigned per unit and then a whole bunch for visitors and that, or one for a one-bedroom, two for a two-bedroom? Because I'm looking to have, my idea would be that probably if you have a one-bedroom apartment, you're probably only going to have one car. And two-bedroom, two cars.
Right,
Whatever.
and that's the kind of where I was thinking as well, that it automatically, not to have actual, assigned, but it would just say you are allotted with the two-bedroom, two spaces, one bedroom, one space, but we can definitely, come back as, oh, you got an extra car or you got two people living in one bedroom that they have cars, and it's definitely acceptable as well. Yeah.
And from a code perspective too, just to iterate the code, the requirement per unit is 2.25 spaces per unit. So that essentially bakes into the code that you're going to have for every 4 units, there's going to be an extra space for visitors. And then if you have units that have 1 vehicle that's there may be apartments that or units that have 3 vehicles there. It's to balance out that it's not to say that this unit is only allowed to have 2.25 vehicles per that unit. It's intended to provide parking for the entire facility. So if you do reserve spaces, as Mr. Graziano is alluding to, you may be able to assign one of those spaces to each unit and then have the rest kind of free flow, open parking for visitors or other residents that are in the
Good
facility.
point, yeah. Yeah.
How about if we take this approach, gentlemen, and I'm keeping an open mind about this, that when we call the motion, we'll say that staff will work with the petitioner when it becomes fully residential to modify parking. Does that work? Or is that just, is that acceptable?
But investigate assigning spaces on full build up. Yep.
Okay.
Something to that effect.
All right, unless anyone has any questions, I'm going to attempt to call this motion.
Mr. Chairman, before you call the motion,
Yes.
do we want to make sure everybody's aware of
Yes.
what's a positive recommendation and what's not?
That's why we like working with you, Mr. Jasper. So just for the record, publicly, ladies and gentlemen, I did say to the petitioner earlier 2 things, Mr. Jasper. One was that we do not have a full complement of commissioners here at the podium tonight, and that your petition does require 4 positive votes to move forward to the Board of Elected Officials. Either way, it will still move forward. In the event that it doesn't pass with 4 positive votes, it would need a supermajority at the elected official level. That's the requirement in our code. I think that's what Mr. Jasper is alluding to. But for the record, Mr. Jasper, I did cue them in early.
On the record?
Not on the record, now it is on the record.
It was not. In civil terms, if you have 3 votes tonight, if it's a 3-2 vote, you would need at least 4 votes of the trustees at the village board level to pass the requests. If you had 4 votes this evening, then you would just need 4 of the entire board, including the mayor, to vote for it at that level. So it just is additional voting requirement.
Thank you, Mr. Jasper. All right, so we're going to give this a try, everyone. So the chair will entertain a motion to recommend to the Village Board of Trustees approval of a conditional use for a multifamily dwelling and density and parking variance for the property located at 271 Country Commons Road, subject to conditions listed in the staff report. In addition, staff will investigate parking when it becomes fully residential.
Investigate assigning parking.
Assigning parking spaces.
Investigate assigned parking spaces. Thank you very much, Mr. Graziano. That's the motion.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Discussion on the motion, gentlemen.
I think we've beaten it to death.
I think we have. All right, we'll call the motion, please, Mr. Simmons. Call the vote.
Jasper,
Yes.
Graziano,
Yes.
Pippin,
Yes.
Kretschmer,
Yes.
Corey.
Yes. So a lot to do about a positive vote. And so the next step in the process, of course, is to take this forward to the elected officials. We'll wish you continued success. We thank the public for their comments. And before we adjourn, I just want to double check with the gentleman if there's any other questions that you have before we adjourn our meeting. I do know we have a meeting coming up on June the 13th. That meeting will most likely occur at 7:30 PM. I don't think we're going to change that time at this time. So that's going to be the time.
And just for the members of the audience that are here this evening, the petition will go to the village board, the first board meeting in June, which would be June 4th, when we'll schedule that for review by the village board.
And for the record, since we have a number of the public here as well as the petitioner, Mr. Simmons, moving forward, if this petition like this came forward a year from now, what would the voting requirements be in that environment? The same petition a year from now?
It would be similar. So actually all the code requirements under the UDO, this particular project would still require the same relief under the new regulations as it does currently today. And going forward with the vote as well, it would require a simple majority of the members present here this evening as opposed to if you have 5 members present, if it was a 3-2 vote, that would be a positive recommendation going forward.
So I just want to make sure that the gentleman here, because it is modifying, my understanding, Mr. Simmons, is that moving forward, anyone that's requesting a variance requires 4 positive votes, and any other requirement, map amendment, text, et cetera, only requires a majority vote.
Correct. That's correct, yes.
Yeah,
Sorry.
okay. So just so you know, gentlemen, variances will always require these 4 positive votes, and all the other ones are just a majority, okay? All right, so without further ado, the chair will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you very much, everyone.